Hi, all, and welcome to episode 38 of Plain Speaking Sanjiv. Today, I'm going to speak to you about a topic that many of you keep asking about and are very curious about. It is how do airlines decide what aircraft to buy? These questions typically come up, especially if an airline, which has traditionally been either an Airbus or a Boeing operator, orders a new aircraft type that is of the different manufacturer. So, an Airbus operator orders a Boeing type, or a Boeing operator orders an Airbus type, and both aircraft types then have to coexist in the fleet. Decisions like this often result in a lot of aviation pundits making claims that the airline is making a mistake, they didn't do the math right, they did not think about the training costs for the pilots, they did not think about the commonality costs and cost of complexity, and so on and so forth. But let me assure you that most airlines are pretty smart. They've obviously thought about all this, they've obviously incorporated all this into their models, which they build in order to evaluate which aircraft to buy. So, to step back a bit, what are the factors that determine which is the right aircraft for you to buy? You first look at what is the mission you want to fulfill, and mission is defined fundamentally by two things: the range, how far you want the aircraft to fly, and the capacity, how large you want the aircraft to be. Once you define the mission, you look at what are the potential aircraft out there from both Airbus and Boeing or other manufacturers that have offerings that broadly fulfill those missions. Then you go a level or two deeper into, okay, so if you say that you both offer a 300 seat capacity aircraft that can fly 8,000 miles, let's go to the details of what the seating capacity looks like, what the layout of the cabin looks like, how many lavs you have, how many galleys you have, and all of the details, how much leg room, how wide are the seats, and you set some minimum constraints. Say, look, I need at least so many galleys, so many galley cars, so many lavs per passenger. You want minimum seat width to be no less than X, minimum aisle width to be no less than Y, minimum leg room to be no less than Z. And then you force the manufacturers to come back to you with LOPAs, which is cabin drawings. LOPA stands for layout of passenger accommodation. So these are the cabin diagrams that show you exactly where the seats are going to be, and the galleys and the lavs, etc., and where the leg room and the pitch and the width, etc., is going to be. And then once they draw these LOPAs, basis the guidelines and constraints you set for them, you see what is the actual capacity that is offerable to you on the aircraft that can do the mission, which is fly the range that you wanted to fly. Basis that, you can then compute the revenue potential, because that's a math exercise that, okay, you have 300 seats in one, 310 in the other. What are the load factor assumption? What are the fare assumptions? You also look into the cargo payload capacity. You look into operating constraints such as hot and high runway performance, or do you need to take a weight penalty or payload penalty to fly towards the extremes of the range and so forth. And therefore you come up with, okay, after doing all the revenue side mission capability screening, there are these two aircraft, one from Boeing, one from Airbus. Maybe it's a 7879 from Boeing and the A350-900 from Airbus, which can broadly satisfy your requirements. Or maybe there's even the A330-900, which can satisfy your requirements, and say, all right, so from the revenue point of view, any one of these three, with these three LOPAs, can satisfy my requirements, and this is the revenue potential of each. So you then look into the cost side. The cost is not just the cost of the aircraft, it's also the operating cost. Obviously, it is a disposal cost of the aircraft at the end of the lease term or end of life. It is the training costs, for your pilots and crew and engineers and everybody else. It is your maintenance costs. It is, all of this drives cost of the aircraft. So for each of the aircraft that you've shortlisted, you have the revenue potential, you have that number. You then look into the total cost of operating that aircraft over the period of 10 or 15 years that you want the aircraft, taking into account every possible cost driver. You do some sensitivity analysis around it, like what if fuel price changes, so much and so forth. You draw up these sensitivity grids, and then you try to say, okay, in the reasonable zone of assumption, what are the costs, approximate probability adjusted costs or total costs for each of the aircraft types. And then you do a simple math exercise. For each aircraft type, you have the revenue capability basis the constraints you had set, and then you have the total cost which you've computed basis all of the inputs and costs, including training and everything else. And you see what comes out the best. What is the largest margin producing aircraft, and you go with that. Then obviously, during this course of this decision, a lot of back and forth goes on with the aircraft manufacturers, where they try to offer you tweaks to their maybe to the product in order to become more attractive on the revenue side, or they offer you better deals on the cost side in order to overcome what they may perceive to be a revenue disadvantage. And for some airlines, a certain set of attributes may work better than for other airlines. For example, for some airlines, packing in more seats, even though the seat pitch may be much reduced and the seat width may be very narrow, may give you a better answer for their customer segments and their product aspirations than for some other airlines where they may want to have slightly better leg room and pitch, etc., because they think they can command a higher yield through that. So you have to work through all of these assumptions and come up with the aircraft that is best for you. And in some cases, you have multiple airlines around the world that operate both the 787 and the A350. And that is because each aircraft, while they overlap in the mission, towards the boundaries of the missions, they're quite different from each other. So an airline may buy the 787-9 for perhaps flights up to 12 hours, and the A350 for flights which are 12 to 16 hours. Or because A350, the most comparable model to the 787-9, has about the capacity of carrying 50 or 60 more passengers. And they may feel that the larger capacity is useful for them on certain routes and not useful on some other routes. So they may actually, again, end up buying some of both. And rule of thumb is that if you have at least 20 aircraft of one type, then you reach sufficient scale economics. So it's perfectly fine for an airline with, say, 40 or 50 aircraft to have two aircraft types. It is not good for an airline with 6 aircraft to have two aircraft types. That makes no sense whatsoever. But once you reach a certain scale, you can always bring in another aircraft because you get the scale benefits. They're already in place. So hope that's helpful. It's not an exact science, but a lot of work and effort goes into determining what is the best possible, aircraft for your mission. After you put everything into the model and stir the pot, it spits out what are the pros and cons or the bottom line for each possible alternative, and you pick the one that has the most margin for you. So hope that's helpful, and see you again tomorrow with another topic. Thanks. Take care.